think we're recording. Yeah, cool.
Okay, lads and ladies, welcome to Indexer Office Hours 36. For those of you that aren't joining us, hopefully you're able to watch if Penn's Mac is working. This week we'll be going through our regular stints, along with touching on the topic of arbitration and the disputes process. If anyone has any other suggestions for topics or questions as we go, head into the office hours chat and we'll answer any questions that come along. So before we start, I just wanted to send out a reminder to all our indexers. Oliver released a indexer survey last week, and I just wanted to make sure that people were remembering to go and give feedback on that. So that said, let's go into our first topic, which is NodeWatch. So Open Ethereum, as we know, end of life, nothing to talk of there, just another weekly reminder that the boot nodes run by Gnosis are being turned off at the end of October. So yeah, bear that in mind for any peering issues you may have.
I have a dumb question though. What are those?
The seed nodes. So yeah, I think it would mostly affect you if you had didn't already have a peer list, or you're just starting off a completely fresh sync, which, you know, who wants to do that with Open Ethereum at this point?
Yeah, that's true.
So yeah, onto Geth. There's been a new release of Geth in the past week, but it just looks like a bug fix release with some Geth console improvements. Yeah, nothing major to note, just more stability on an already solid client. Sadly, one we can't use for tracing. But for that, we have Eragon. And Eragon also had a new release, but again, not much to talk about, just some bug fixes and small improvements. One thing I did notice in the changelog that some of you might want to note is that they've made the debug level logging a bit less verbose. So some messages that used to come there have been moved to trace logging. So if you rely on anything to do with that, with your monitoring something, just be aware of that. Any comments on any of those releases? People have upgraded. I upgraded to Eragon and it seems all fine for me.
I'm a bit reluctant on upgrading Eragons ever since I have experienced that issue a while ago.
Yeah, I'm not actually relying on it as heavily as it sounds like you are. It's more, yeah, dabbling away.
Our production subgraphs are still being synced by Open Ethereum, even though like somehow everything is not matching the POIs. And yeah, I mean, it's the problem is that I'm still waiting for a bunch of subgraphs to be synced on our Eragon test bed, so that we can move those the database to be the primary database, basically.
Yeah, I'm just wondering. So you're not using Eragon full time like Chris mentioned it was last week?
No, but we used to. But like we saw that there were like tons of problems with like POI discrepancies, and we didn't want to risk anything. But like after a while, I've seen the Open Ethereum also not matching, or at least our database is not matching most like some subgraphs. So like right now I kind of want to like finish syncing up the most important subgraphs and like switch over databases and rely on Eragon entirely. But I'm waiting mostly for Omen and Rot ETH basically to be syncing. Those are very slow. We moved it to like, I was syncing them on one of my Solana machines, as unfortunate as it sounds, but like the difference between that, basically that server is like so overused. So we switched to another like fresh server with nothing running on it. So the difference is literally just 50 blocks per minute, compared to like syncing on that heavy server. So yeah, it's still gonna be like 2 or 3 weeks until we get those subgraphs up in sync, and then I'll probably slap more subgraphs to sync on that. And once we're ready, we can switch over to 𝗟𝗀𝗀 in full 𝗟𝗀𝗀 in production.
I feel like we should, because we don't get, like, for the amount of indexers we have in the set, we don't get all of them attending office hours. Obviously, some people watch after the recording you put up, but I think maybe we should do a ping later just out of interest to see who's already using 𝗟𝗀𝗀, who's maybe, relying on 𝗟𝗀𝗀 more than others, like, how all in they are.
Oliver has the indexer survey stuff.
That was I remember that asked which clients you're using, but I'm more talking about on how deep in the woods people are. Like Chris is possibly one of the only ones that is all in at this moment.
I guess we can ping indexers in the 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀 chat or something, or in the indexer announcements.
It'd just be interesting to know, because I kind of always wonder when we talk about 𝗟𝗀𝗀 each week who's actually
it's basically just me and a couple of other people, including Chris, that are using it mostly, I think.
Yeah.
Which is a bit unfortunate given given the situation with Open Ethereum, to be honest.
Yeah, I gotta say, I'll probably do as Chris has done, not in the not too distant future, and just go all in, and you just have to live with the potential consequences, I guess. But again, I think this shows a little lack of faith in the arbitration process and what it's there for.
Definitely.
But we can touch on that later.
Mm-hmm.
So, indexer tooling. For the tooling that we've already discussed in past episodes, I didn't see any new updates of note. We will have a new indexer-related tooling for us to talk about next week, though. So, if you're interested in hearing about that, tune in next week, because we don't have all that much to talk about tooling in recent episodes. With Repo Watch, I didn't see any new releases or updates apart from for Graph CLI, and that was something pretty small, to be honest, which is just a small fix for Mac M1 processor users regarding Postgres errors when running graph tests. I'm not sure of the context of that beyond what's written, but if this is something any of you guys with the new Macs are running into, just bear it in mind.
Yeah, it's probably because most of the team has Macs, and most of the devs in general reuse Macs, so I guess
I've got a feeling they would have run into this before most of the indexers, to be honest.
Yeah.
So, forum highlights. I did have the survey mentioned by Oliver in there, but we already covered that at the start. So it's mostly just some announcements, I guess. So submissions for Web3 grants are now open. If you think you've got a good idea for tooling or any other contribution that could be made to the graph ecosystem, whether it's for indexers or the broader community, you're welcome to throw your ideas in the ring. You can either do that via the forum thread, which I'll link in a moment, or alternatively, you can reach out to someone on the foundation. I believe that Reem or Pedro are the first points of contact for that stuff. Maybe someone can correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that is correct. Reem and Pedro. Pedro, especially from a tooling perspective. So Reem coordinates the grant process itself. Pedro jumps in when it gets into sort of the technical discussions and understanding what the idea is about. So, but as a first point of contact, it's Reem. She's going to handle sort of the discussions.
Okay, cool. Thanks for the context. I wasn't looking at chat for a moment there. I just noticed that Vince and Quick both said that they're all in on 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀, so props for that. Let us know how it goes, and if you've got any issues, we should talk about that in indexers. I know Chris will be interested to hear about that. He's got both feet in now. Cone's still on OE, but got 𝗟𝗀𝗀𝗀 servers ready in the background. Yep, basically the same situation I'm in, to be honest. So, next forum thread of note is to do with the curation tax. Sorry, just had to get my notes. So, I'll just pass that into chat. So, there was a proposal a while ago to reduce the tax on curation signaling. This includes subgraph upgrades, actually, from 2% to 1%. not just to reduce the friction on curation in general, but I believe the main aim of this was to lessen the burden on subgraph devs and their costs of upgrading, because they already take on quite a significant risk as far as it goes to lockup for their initial signaling and then paying per upgrade. And helping them out with this was important because subgraph devs, obviously them and their end user products that they power through subgraphs are the primary avenue for value to enter the graph ecosystem. So hopefully this alleviates some cost and concerns on their end. From our side as indexers, it might not have a direct impact on changes to signal or speed of upgrades initially, but I'm expecting this is going to have some kind of compounding effect over time as subgraphs migrate over to mainnet and that side becomes a lot more active. And there's a link to the snapshot voting that was done by the Graph Council at the bottom of the thread I just linked in chat. I don't know if anyone wants to comment on that.
Yeah, maybe just a couple of things more was from 2.5% to 1%. The split still remains the same, 50-50 between curators and subgraph devs, carrying the burden there. So that has not changed. And yeah, it's been something that in the subgraph developer community, it's been raised as a big pain point after launch. So there's quite an excitement there, and hope it's going to be part of what will help, triggering, broader movement over to mainnet.
Yep, agreed. I just noticed Chris has joined the chat. I thought he was going to be AWOL for this one. So hello, Chris, from the sidelines.
Chris, aren't you in an airplane right now?
Yeah, that's what I thought.
I am at the airport waiting to board, but hey, everyone.
Wow, welcome.
That's dedication.
Yeah, the dedication on that guy, yeah.
So, that's everything for our usual topics. We've still got 45 minutes on the clock, and sadly, the only thing, there wasn't really much else of note this week that I could really go into. Happy to pick up topics from chat if there's anything other people want to talk about. But something I wanted to touch on that I've heard a lot of things via DM about, different opinions, is the arbitration and disputes process. What people's experiences who've been involved on either side of that are. I was kind of hoping Constantine could have turned up for that, because I know P2P were one of the first people to go through that process. What people think about the process, any feedback they have with, concerns or anything else they want to say on that matter. Who wants to start? Okay, guess I'll start. From my side, I feel like it would be good if the process could at least be sped up. I'm not sure the best way to go about this. I guess it would be more hands on deck. I see Ford's in the chat. Maybe he could comment on that, because I know this initially started as a 2 of 3 multi-sig. I'm wondering if, since the members of the Arbitration Council are obviously very busy with that and a lot of other stuff, if it might be an idea to start expanding that, even though the charter hasn't been ratified and this is still in its infancy. If maybe, it could be a benefit to everyone if we can have a lot of these milestones being hit, like the one we had with broken subgraphs being allocated to, and now also some of these concerns over Eragon. I don't think they've got a lot of merit, the concerns people are having about potentially being slashed for using Eragon in a legitimate manner. But I don't know. I feel like if some of these disputes were addressed quicker, somehow, that might put more faith in the process if people see a lot more disputes coming to a head.
Hey guys, yeah, I totally agree that it would be really helpful to get some of those rolled through. Ariel and I have definitely been pretty busy on other stuff, and so we're hoping to, and we've been discussing maybe bringing in someone else or maybe a few people to focus on the investigation side, so that Ariel and I can focus more on writing up results, making the decisions, executing transactions, and that kind of stuff. we've had some movement towards like working groups amongst the indexers. So there's been some improvement amongst the community and just like being able to check POIs and investigate the root causes. So that's been really nice to see, but we need to start to move that into the arbitration process. So there's definitely a few things in flight that are important there that you touched on. The arbitration charter, like fingers crossed, should be ratified very soon, since some of the requirements for that have landed recently in graph nodes. So I'm hopeful that that'll get in very soon, and that's going to be really helpful to stabilize the process. And then, yeah, I'm really hoping to get someone else in to help out on some of the arbitration investigation stuff. So if anyone wants to volunteer there, I've had a few people that I've talked to there already, but we're starting that process now.
Yeah, I did wonder about that. I did have someone in mind myself. Maybe I can talk about that with you in DM sometime. Does anyone else have any comments on what they've? I don't know how many people in here have actually been involved in a dispute on either side of it. I know some people may have been fishermen and want to remain anonymous, but you know, even from an observer's standpoint, what do people think of the process? And also, the risk you feel is on your shoulders as an indexer potentially when you observe the process.
I can add something to that. I participated in a dispute, kind of like helping out as much as I could with like doing some research on whether the subgraphs that were used, I think it was the Minato Fund dispute, whether the subgraphs were like used with a purpose of actually exploiting the network. It was hard to actually debug anything on that particular case because of how like subgraphs are submitted on chain. You only have like the manifest, and then you have like the WASM files, but the WASM files you cannot use them for much, I guess. But it still showed a lot of information about how it was being used and what the let's say the data points that you had to take the subjective I guess whether or not you were going to draw or accept the dispute, so the result for the dispute. I think there are many like it's clearly very difficult for both Ford and Ariel because they have so much like responsibility with those decisions. So it's I get the point that it probably will be better if it's sped up a little bit. Maybe it has like deadlines or whatever, but in most of these cases, debugging the issues and making sure that the final result for the dispute is accurate, unfortunately, takes a lot of time. I don't know how that could be sped up, maybe with some changes on the amount of data that you have available to take those decisions. But yeah, from my point of view, it was really hard to debug the issues themselves. So I get the position that Ariel and Ford are like unfortunately in.
I think the easiest way to like quote unquote it's not probably the easiest, but like the safest way to navigate around these issues. I'm here talking about specifically about divergent POIs and this sort of stuff, is that we need to make sure that everything within the graph node, within the graph ecosystem, software ecosystem, and the archive nodes are fully deterministic. So there's no way you can diverge other than manually editing your database, right? That comes with time and lots of effort, I guess.
Yeah, and it's not something that you can have set in stone.
Yeah.
I mean, we assumed determinism issues were solved, but it's not like you can actually be completely 100% sure about that, right, Ford?
Yeah, so I mean, this is going to be, a constant thing that we're working on and making sure that we're on top of and testing. So I think that like a combination of having more hands-on investigation more automation tools to do some of the investigation, and then some external work from the Aragon team and the GraphNode team and some of the other core dev teams to root cause some of this stuff is all going to have to kind of come together in order to help improve the situation. So it's kind of tricky because these POIs are this single point that represents many complex systems amongst our other graph network. So in order to solve this single point of failure, we have to kind of move out in concentric circles into these different areas of the system. And I think we're doing a good job of it, but we definitely need to continue to focus on that.
Can I just ask a question, Ford, about how lengthy the processes might actually affect the outcomes? So say you've got someone who's got a dispute that's open and it goes on for a number of months. From my understanding, and I'm not sure if you're monitoring in case this happens, they could actually unstake entirely and escape any punishment.
Yeah,
and
that's true.
Yeah, and then on the flip side of that, say you had someone with a dispute that was opened and they were found guilty at the end of the process, but this process is many months later and they've since had their stake added to them. Would they be punished retroactively for the percentage of their stake at the time of the offense, or, as I imagine it, would it be based on the stake at the time of punishment?
Very good question. I would need to double check that, but I'm pretty positive it's at the time of punishment. So to your point, if we can reduce that window, it's going to make the process more effective and more direct.
Yeah, because that would disproportionately impact indexers that are adding to their stake over time.
Yeah, it works both ways actually. You can either unstake everything or like stake more over time. So,
well, say you've got like one of the vesting contracts that you can't unstake from, other than the rewards on top.
But, yeah, but then you can take the money out of the protocol into the vesting contract, and the vesting contract acts like a wallet. You can't slash the wallet. You can only slash the GRT that lives in the protocol. So that the one that are staked the moment you call withdraw. So you have to call unstake, wait for 28 days, and then call withdraw. The moment you call withdraw, there's nothing anyone can do about those GRT.
Yeah, you're talking about escaping though.
It would be kind of like suspicious if someone that has an active dispute is like unstaking everything. So I guess in those cases, and Ford, correct me if I'm wrong, most likely it's gonna be taken to a higher priority and maybe even resolved before the 28 days pass. But yeah, that's just a speculation.
Yeah, I mean, we are monitoring the network, so if we do see like weird unstaking activity, which we haven't really seen that, but that would be a trigger that might cause us to regroup and see how to respond to that. These are all really good points, and I do think that for just for the community and understanding how these decisions will work, and then for understanding the process, like we need to focus on shortening this process. Realistically, we've been like pretty focused on a lot of other things the last month, but hopefully the next month we can really refocus on this stuff.
There was also something in the arbitration charter that in the future it might change that only the stake that was actually part of the allocation would be open to slashing, and right now it's still the total, as I understand it. How is that conversation going?
As far as like in my work, I haven't really been a part of that conversation. I don't think that there's much movement there to move towards just the allocated stake. I would love to open up that conversation more. What do you guys think about that?
I think it's fair game for slashes to be applied only to allocated stake.
Yeah, I agree. It's I mean, we're talking about slashing based on an allocation, so I feel like your risk should be weighted towards
And
the allocation.
also the amount of time that allocation was open for could also be some considering. But actually, this also implies people can abuse the protocol in some ways.
Yeah, that's an interesting thing you said there about it being time-based. Is there a chance that there could be a decaying or even reverse decaying effect, like was mentioned on delegation taxes and stuff like this, applied to allocation slashing?
Mm-hmm.
I think it's what he's trying to say is more geared towards the amount of rewards that you can get out of the allocation that you're being disputed for, because that's where the attack vector might be, right? If your rewards are higher than your actual GRT in risk, that's always something that you would rationally want to do, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tricky because in other parts of the system, like the overall stake of an indexer is used as a proxy for security. So for the indexer selection algorithm, I believe the overall stake that the indexer has in the network is a pretty important data point.
Self-stake, right?
Yeah, the self-stake. So if the slashing was only for allocations, that might have like a diverge, like the amount of risk that indexer has based on the amount of reward that they get, and further contribute to a lack of like decentralization. But I'm just kind of thinking off the top of my head here.
It might be that needs to be questioned as well then, either as a consequence of changing this or either independently. I mean, imagine you have a 100 mil indexer and they have exactly 1 GRT allocated to a specific subgraph. Why would their full 100 mil bring more security to that particular subgraph where they have only the 1 GRT allocated?
Yeah, it's because they have more risk. So right now the slashing is based on their self-stake. So if they do present bad data on the indexing side or the query side, they have a higher risk for themselves. So there's like higher incentive for them to present accurate data. So that's kind of the thinking behind that model. So if you then move the slashing to just the allocated stake, then you start to decouple that, and then the incentives change pretty significantly.
So, any more thoughts on that, or any other topics that people wish to talk about? Because, as I mentioned earlier, we're struggling a little for topics to bring up. If anyone's got anything on their mind, now's the time to speak up.
Yeah, I wanted to follow up on what we were talking about. I mean, there is a reason why you make an allocation the size that the allocation is being made. So I'm not convinced that the security or the risk should be proportional to your entire stake. There is already an additional cost of making smaller allocations because of the gas cost that we are paying. So if our risk doesn't scale down with making a smaller allocation, that's even another argument of not making those smaller allocations. And I would presume that smaller allocations are generally more likely on smaller subgraphs, which means that those smaller entities looking for data might find a hard time getting serviced by the graph.
Yeah, so you're just talking about like the potential of an indexer having small stake, and because of that not getting as much queries as is optimal, which I think probably could be pretty much solved in a contained way in the indexer selection algorithm. But I do think this is an interesting conversation to continue to have. And one thing that I think would be really nice, and I've been talking about with some people at EduNode, is trying to make the indexer selection algorithm less of a black box. So specifically, mostly for you guys, so you can have a better understanding of, under certain context, why you might be getting less queries than you expect or more, or why others are getting more, and then help you optimize your setups. Because right now I feel like the indexer selection is kind of you don't really have any transparency into it at the moment.
Yeah, that would be great.
Agree.
Yeah, I think that's important as well when we're talking about potentially having indexer performance as some kind of metric on dashboards and other tools. Indexers need to be aware of what they're doing, good or bad, so that they can, maybe look at their operations and adjust accordingly.
And to that end, as you guys have ideas on stuff that would be helpful there, I'll always try to float them to like Pedro and I, so we can do RFPs for them. One thing that I have been thinking about that I think would be awesome for you guys is like a query analysis tool. So you can identify expensive queries, expensive subgraphs, and then facilitate database optimizations as needed.
Can that be done with like Postgres analysis only?
Postgres analysis only.
Like PG stats,
potentially.
something. There was something I know for a fact that Goldberg was using it during the testnet a year ago to like figure out which queries were like crushing the database.
Yeah, there's like a lot of specific Postgres tools. I think that you could float to the indexers and probably off the shelf have some interesting improvements. And then I think at like a higher level would be nice to analyze the logs and like look at query structures, compare that to the cost models, and see like where your database is spending more time, whether you need to like limit volume on a certain query by like raising the cost, where you need to like add indexes and stuff like that. And then down the line, maybe even like adding tools to facilitate those changes in the database, so you don't have to go into the Postgres database and manually create an index. Maybe you can like configure what indexes you have through a single file. I think stuff like that would really help make the optimization process like a lot quicker and like close the feedback loop.
Yeah, I always said whenever I was talking with Sebastian that I feel like the best way to compete is first to optimize the database and the queries themselves, like the amount of time it takes to reach a certain to read a certain part of the table by building certain or deleting certain indexes of the subgraphs, and then only get to the cost models, at least in my opinion, because like if you only play with the cost models, you'll miss out on tons of other potential improvements that you can make to make your life easier overall.
I will give a little teaser that I think I'm allowed to give for next week's show, something on this topic as far as, testing your setup might go. The tooling I was mentioning earlier is to do with an RFP we had open for a query traffic simulator. So someone will be coming on to present the work they'll be doing on that, which might actually help us with optimizing our infra a bit.
I know we already have a tool available, don't we?
Yeah, I saw something. I think I even used it at one point, but this is something that's going to be a lot more fleshed out from my understanding and from what I remember looking over the RFP many months ago.
Is it coming from the same guys?
I'm not sure, actually. I only spoke to someone about it today who's onboarded them. But yeah, I'll have to see. I have to speak to them before the next episode. So, think we're out of topics. Maybe I could put some people on the spot. Yeah, I don't know. One thing I've seen mentioned at the moment, I don't know if anyone wants to talk about their thoughts on that, or if maybe Ford can share a bit more insight, is I've seen 𝗨𝘀𝗬𝗂 𝗟𝗶 from Edge and Node having been in some interviews and seen some mentions of him speaking about off-chain indexing. I don't know if there's anything particular to share with that, or if there's anything really to talk about, but it's just something I found quite interesting, and I saw some mentions of that there's how would I phrase it, like issues with determinism when you're doing off-chain indexing. But I'm just wondering, Ford, maybe you can expand on what is meant by, like what kind of sources are we talking about indexing? Because when I think about off-chain, this could be anything from any kind of API that serves anything or any other data source.
Yeah. So specifically, we're talking about things like IPFS and Arweave, and I think like the major driver use case for that need is NFTs and metadata that are stored off-chain. Of course, there's also a lot of value in bringing in other data sets, whatever they may be. And for those, I think it makes more sense to provide an offering to stitch stuff at the client level, so you could stitch together other data sets with the graph. But the big problem that we are trying to solve, and I think that Nader was touching on, is like things like IPFS and Arweave. So there's a pretty big data availability problem, and with finding consensus on whether a file is available or not. And so we're working on some solutions there. Obviously, we have some IPFS support, but there's determinism issues. Like one indexer could get a different result from another. So that's a overall big research problem that's being worked on at Edge and Node right now, and something that's like high priority, but is a big project. So it's probably going to be not till maybe like Q1 next year that's ready.
Okay, cheers. Interesting. Yeah, I did see a mention of Arweave, but I have to admit I didn't really look into what exactly Arweave is or does.
Yeah, Arweave is, I mean, you can think of it as similar as IPFS. It provides a decentralized data storage layer. They have like their own chain, and they have a whole ecosystem. They actually have some level of smart contracts as well, which is kind of interesting. But yeah, generally it's the data availability problem for any of this metadata. So there's all these decentralized storage solutions, but agreeing on where a file is and whether it's available at a given point in time is a tricky problem that other teams are trying to solve with their own chains and more complex solutions. So we're trying to figure out a way of leveraging those solutions, or I mean, potentially even launching sort of our own data availability chain, because we already have a network of you guys, and we could maybe have consensus among the indexers around what data is available. But like I said, that's like heavily in research right now. We don't have specific plans on how that's going to be implemented at this time, but it's a pretty high value thing to be able to support the NFT use case.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm looking in chat. I saw someone was typing before. I was hoping they... Oh, here's Hope.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, some time ago I was talking in one of the channels about that the indexer misses sometimes the pair created event, and then subsequently doesn't know to track the volume of those tokens. And apparently this is or was a known issue that, for example, Hosted faced on pretty much all of the low block time chains. And I was wondering if we are getting any closer to sort of avoid that issue, or even just to be aware that the issue happened, and therefore rolling back the subgraph the needed amount of time.
Yeah, I don't have specific context on that issue. I think I remember like investigating something like that with you
Yeah.
on your infra, but I don't know if there is a specific resolution to that.
Yeah, I think it was Adam who said that they faced issues like that on hosted service as well. I think this is pretty significant. At least that's how I see it. Yeah, it would be great to know that either improvements are coming or either potential solutions to track that. Oh, look, the subgraph missed something. You need to roll it back as soon as possible.
It makes me wonder if these are the only things that are being missed, like the only type of events that are being missed. To me, it's like a more general problem that needs to be investigated thoroughly.
Yeah, my understanding from back in the time is that on those low block time chains, the RPCs sometimes return empty or incomplete responses, and the indexer node doesn't know better than this is the accurate data. So it can happen at any request, but it's particularly impactful if it happens on a pair created event, because then it doesn't know how to track all the subsequent data. If it happens on a single transfer, the impact is much more limited, unless that maybe was a whale transfer. It can also be quite impactful. But yeah, it's definitely wider than that. That it might miss information, small or big.
Interesting. Yeah. So, I mean, we have integration testing on Ethereum mainnet at least, and some EVM chains, and we've been doing that for years, and it's pretty consistently picking up all events, I would say. But we have this rapid expansion into other L2s, other chains, and these teams are having to host up their own RPC endpoints, and then they're scaling pretty massively, pretty quickly. So we've noticed on the hosted service and in the network and with you guys that, you know, there's some issues as these RPC endpoints scale. So it's something that we should all be aware of. And as you know, on the hosted service side, we're trying to be good about really testing endpoints and making sure these teams are ready and prepared with infra for high scale, because you know, the scale that the graph nodes have to hit these RPC endpoints at, especially with the whole indexer network or whole hosted service, is more than most other use cases. So we're really like forcing them to scale fast, and we need to make sure that we're also like testing and adding robustness with multiple RPC endpoints for these new chains.
Yeah, I'm wondering if there might be a solution in terms of I don't know, hitting the RPCs with the same request multiple times might be not the best. But what if you have more than one RPC and that the indexer node is simultaneously firing at both and then comparing the results or something like that? Something that gives an extra sort of input. I know or I assume it will probably create some additional workload for, well, definitely for the RPC, but potentially also for the indexer in terms of how fast it can index. But if it's missing data, that's sort of, in my opinion, missing data is a larger problem than potentially increasing the load on these servers.
I wonder if we could just connect the graph node to a load balancer to some sort that hits, basically, it's not necessarily a load balancer, but like a splitter that splits, like you said, the request sent into two nodes, and then have the request back. Yeah, that's probably something you can do if you want to play with it.
Yeah, it's really tricky. I mean, ultimately, we really want to push on all these RPC endpoints and ETH clients and EVM clients and other clients to really be sure that their results are deterministic. Because if we get in a case where the graph node has to like double check every RPC result or go back and double check things, or just if there's any lack of certainty around the results of an RPC, that just like really blows up a lot of the assumptions in the graph node. So hopefully we can find some solutions that are external to the graph node, and really start like adding testing suites, maybe adding load balancers like this, maybe adding like some way of quickly rolling back if like something was identified as being missed, and like build out the tooling around that. Because it really doesn't seem feasible for the graph node to like assume that any response, like most responses, could be incorrect.
I mean, a regular load balancer wouldn't solve it. You would need to do something that does a majority check of responses of underlying nodes, that it really sends out parallel requests and then compares the results, whether that's built into the graph node or some external tool. I'm not sure if there would be much difference, besides who needs to spend time to build it. But yeah, it would need to be something like a majority check. And what I understood back then from Adam is it's something that happens, especially on those low block time chains. That indeed you need to assume that the RPC data might not be correct, or might incorrectly be blank or incorrectly be incomplete.
Yeah, and then that becomes tricky too, because maybe like one of the RPC calls comes back a little later, and then does the graph node have to wait for all of them, or does it have some way of retroactively correcting it? Or
I wonder if the fire hose approach would fix this in any way.
It should, yeah, it should, because the fire hose should be instrumenting. It doesn't have to rely on an RPC call. Yeah. It's instrumenting like the data structure at a lower level. So it should help avoid some of this stuff, but I don't think the fire hose is always going to be like instantly available on new chains. So it's not always going to be the solution, but that'll definitely help.
All right, that's good to know.
Speaking of fire hose, who's been getting that going besides Cohen? Have you been testing that? I'd love to hear some of your initial results.
Yeah, I was working on it in the past. But I at some point I ran into issues that it would constantly stop preparing the block, so to say. And right now I have a lot of work on the BSC nodes. So I sort of had to put that on hold for a bit. But yeah, initially it went quite well and it looked really promising. I was commenting on it earlier on the community call by invitation of Pedro. I think, yeah, the technology as such, and knowing how much challenges there are indexing something like BSC the classical way, yes, I'm convinced that it would be very interesting to move forward. But I from what I understand, there's still quite a bit of work to do in terms of getting Firehose production ready, especially for the mainnet, where things like determinism and things like, okay, how do we identify that this Sparkle subgraph is the same as this classical subgraph and stuff like that. So I'm only looking at it from the outside, but in terms of getting it production ready for mainnet, that looks like there's still a lot of work to do, and it will still take a lot of time.
Cool. Thanks for the update. Yeah, I think the Streaming Fast team is really focusing on like testing and comparing the data sets, and hopefully we'll have some good results with that soon.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to run it, I would say go for it, play with it. What I find is that Streaming Fast is always very, very helpful to help you out if you encounter a problem. So I'm very happy about how Streaming Fast is going about it. I can only compliment them for that. But yeah, I think there is still a bunch of stuff to do, and I need to also make sure that my production servers stay live before I can tinker around with all this awesome new technology.
Okay, looks like we got 5 minutes left. Hasn't been any further suggestions in chat, just some questions. So Unless anyone has anything else to touch on quickly, we may just end 5 minutes early this week. I'm going to take the tumbleweed as an indicator. So thanks for joining everyone this week, and hopefully see you next week.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Ciao.
Thanks, y'all.